Good afternoon and welcome back to Dial Global Conference. We are here for the fourth panel event and my name is Ruth. I am Baroness Hunt of Bethnal Green, but Ruth is fine for this kind of setting, but the men use Lord all the time, so I try and drop in my Baroness first when I can. I'm also director of a small consultancy called Deeds and Words where we work with organisations on issues of inclusion. We are joined today by an absolutely fantastic panel, Antonio, Sandy, Misha-Ann and Paul, who will all introduce themselves shortly. But today we are talking about authentic corporate allyship, moving beyond those performative actions. And to my mind, there's a big conflation out there between marketing and allyship, and people think they mean the same thing, and often it's the marketing that gets dropped and suddenly the allyship disappears. So today we're going to be really exploring what allyship is actually about, why it is key to organizational effectiveness, not just a nice to have, and also reflecting on how each and every one of us has the power to both be an ally and need an ally, and the power changes that happen in any different setting means that those things change. There are times when in the House of Lords and for those of you on a global audience, the House of Lords is a very odd institution. It's an unelected second chamber where the majority of people are over the age of 65. As a little baby dyke in that settings, I definitely need some allies. And there are times when the Black, Asian and minority ethnic members of that House, who are also the outsiders, need me to be an ally too. So we can both take those different roles. And that's hopefully what we'll be getting into today. So I'll be asking some questions of our panel, but before we crack on, love to hear a little bit from them, introductions, where they're from and what they're about. Antonio, give us a sense of who you are and where you're from. But you'll also have to come off mute, my love, because I think what you're going to say is going to be amazing. Oh no, we still can't hear. Can everybody else hear Antonio? Antonio, we still can't hear you, so I'm going to pause you for a moment and move us round to Misha-Ann while we have a fiddle with your sound there. Misha-Ann, come on in.
Hello, can everybody?
We can hear you, Misha-Ann.
Yes. My name is Misha-Ann, and I am an industrial organizational psychologist, workplace activist, and researcher. I am fanatically passionate about how people experience work, and I use analytics to draw awareness and attention to how different people are experiencing work so that work can work for people, regardless of who you are, who you love, where you were born. A little bit about me. I live in the United States in Austin, Texas. I'm currently in Boston, though, and I was born and raised in Jamaica. So I am a proud immigrant. So I consider myself, you'll see this on my signature, my email signature. I am Jamaican by birth, American by choice, and I'm proud of both.
Welcome, Misha-Ann. And I did a Marshall Fellowship and spent some time in Austin, and it was described as the blueberry in the jam. Is that still the case?
The blueberry and the tomato soup.
Blueberry
Close.
in the tomato soup, British jam. But still the case, I hope. Fingers
Yes,
crossed.
absolutely.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Paul, welcome to you, Paul.
Hello, hi, hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, awesome, great. Hi everyone, I'm Paul. I work for an organisation called Essence MediaCom, and I look after everything sort of people experience, learning, culture, engagement, etc. Within the business, and that's a global role. Prior to this, I was really lucky enough to work for what I think is a phenomenal organisation, the Co-op in the UK. Around 60,000 people at the time that I worked there for about 8 years. And I was lucky enough, I think my interest in inclusion and diversity was really sparked there because I experienced an organization that really put inclusion and diversity at the heart of why it exists and the purpose of the business. Lucky enough to work with some amazingly inclusive leaders and some amazing allies as well. So I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about it as we go along, but that's kind of where I'm from and what I'm about.
Paul, it's really great to have you here. Thank you so much. Look forward to hearing more on your thoughts on this. Sandy, come on in.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you, Sandy?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here. I'm ready to learn, connect, and grow with this amazing panel of experts and visionaries. Thank you for having me. So I'm the Chief People Officer of Pinwheel API, although I think I'm officially changing my title to the Chief Superpower Officer. I realized it yesterday when you all prompted me with my title, and I can't believe I've never thought of that title before, which just shows you how every time we get together in Dial, we learn. And so I say Chief Superpower Officer because I do think the thing we're unleashing is superpowers, and I actually do believe diversity and the difference engine are at the core of superpowers in all of us, right? So Pinwheel API is an API, payroll API, that uses payroll data to help build fair financial systems so that there's actually more financial access for all, including underserved communities. And there's so much payroll data now in an age of data that can actually help people who didn't have access before unfairly or for other reasons gain that access. And so that's a power in terms of equity we need to put into all people's hands, including diversity. My quick origin story is that when I was a kid, I was sick. Doctors told me I'd be sick forever. My parents told me I could do anything if I worked hard enough. While I was sick, I could only do two things: observe people deeply, and I learned that each person was different and their creativity was exclusively unique to them. So I fell in love with difference and realized it was a superpower, because that means every individual created in a way no one else on the planet did. And then I read comic books, which taught me that creativity was a superpower, and that when we bring our superpower together and share experiences through media, we can really change the world. So my dad was a banker. I learned business. I trained as a rabbi and a psychoanalyst, but my mission was really to help people discover and unleash their superpowers in life. So I decided I would only work for companies that I felt understood that mission, whether it was Disney or Real Network, Second Life, or Yahoo and Verizon. Therefore, difference and diversity was at the core for me forever, and I have always seen it as a superpower. And so I met Dial actually at Yahoo, when Yahoo and Verizon and Dial were teaming up to really unleash diverse superpowers around the world. And that mission just continues today. So I'm really excited to be here, because I think when we learn and exchange ideas like this and commitments, we do change the world in every minute. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Sandy. And I love that cross-pollination of different cultures that bring these things to life. In my work with the armed forces through Teams of Words, we often talk about the difference between Avengers and DC Comics, and how Superman takes a very different approach to leadership to the Avengers, and what we can learn from that. There's so much we can learn if we look a little bit beyond our peripheral vision. Absolutely. Antonio, I have a message reassuring me all is well. How are you? Come on in.
I hope so. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Antonio.
Perfect. So thanks a lot. First of all, Sandy, thanks for your presentation. I mean, I love the title, Chief Superpower. I think my title now is very boring. So I will try to change it from my side as well. I will speak.
How about it?
So first of all, thanks a lot for inviting me. So I'm actually Italian. So I'm from Sicily, from the really south. We say still Italy, although sometimes we think that we are in the north of Africa. So it's always a big challenge to understand which country we belong. So I travel extensively and live in different countries over the last 15 years. So across Poland, UK, and Belgium. I returned to Italy almost 6 months ago to our Italian office in the role of Europe D&I lead. So I'm part of the global D&I team. I'm responsible for the strategy and application of operational strategy across the 27 countries in Europe and the 12 production sites. And today I am in Madrid, in one of our production sites that is in Madrid. So I'm meeting with our collegiate groups here in Spain. So glad to be here, glad to share more and to understand also more of other great best practice from other peers. So thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Antonio, and thank you for persisting with the tech. My role here is to keep us on time. We've got until 2:45, and this amazing panel, we could just go for lunch, right? And we could just talk about all these things and shoot the breeze. But my job is to try and keep us on track, because there's lots of people watching who want to hear your different thoughts. So I'm going to get straight into this topic and come straight to you first, Paul, if that's okay, and bring others in as and when. But I think the nub of the question here is, what is that difference between performative allyship and meaningful active support, and why does it matter? Why does it matter that we differentiate between those two and pursue the latter rather than the former? Would love to hear your thoughts, Paul.
Thank you. And I think you set this up really nicely for me in your introduction, because I like the way you've described it as marketing versus true allyship. I think if we look at the world around us, so much change, so much disruption, so much uncertainty. Certainly, probably within the last 5 years or so, organizations have realized that, staying silent isn't an option. And I think what we've seen is many organizations coming forward with a particular perspective or a particular point of view around certain topics of diversity and inclusion. I guess the thing that is that sets true allyship apart is not only talking about it and giving it a viewpoint, but then crucially doing something about it and actually taking meaningful action, and taking action which is tangible, which is relevant for the context, but also which is sustainable as well. And I think in terms of, we'll cover, I'm sure, in this conversation, many things that organizations can do to kind of, start to really think about allyship. But I guess for me, there's a couple of things. So the first thing is around inclusion. So having a really clear belief and a really clear perspective that inclusion is at the heart of why we exist as an organization, and how we will deliver to our purpose, and how we will deliver to our strategy and objectives. And I think that kind of has to sit as a core belief within the business. I think also creating a space to listen. I talk about this a lot to people, and when I give lots of people feedback, I just say, just ask me more questions. Just ask questions. Don't feel the need to have the answers to everything. Just ask me questions and ask your team questions. And I think, being really curious, exploring other points of view, but also, challenging our own assumptions around, the perspectives and the opinions of underrepresented groups is really important. I think leadership, I'm sure we'll come on to talk about this, but I think leadership plays a critical role. I don't think it's only the responsibility of leaders across the business, but I think they have an accountability to set the tone for the rest of the organization. And then I think accountability. So how do we know that we're creating that inclusive environment? How do we know that we're doing the right things? How do we know that we're really great allies? Through data measurement and really getting under the skin of the experiences of different groups within our organization. So I will stop there. I won't talk anymore. But I think there's lots of things that are important to move from the marketing to the true allyship.
Thank you, Paul. And I loved it. And I'm bringing you in next, Misha, and I'm struck that you felt that the purpose and effectiveness of an organization is anchored by inclusion, and therefore allyship is essential. I wonder sometimes whether organizations fully grasp that, and that's where the marketing comes in. But Misha, build on that, or something completely different. Would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I just want to underscore something that Paul said about listening. So many times I hear of organizations implementing something for people that they've never listened to. So this is supposed to be for me and benefiting me, but you never asked me. And that, I think, is one of the ways that an organization's actions can come across as performative. You just want to be seen as doing something, anything, and not really what it is that population needs to be done. So I think that is super, super important. And I'm really glad, Paul, that you said that.
Thank you, Misha. And Antonio, I wonder if I can bring you in at this stage, and if you can think of any examples of where that active allyship has really happened, rather than that kind of performative. In my experience, there's a lot of rainbows put on a lot of tats, and it's called allyship, right? But I don't need a burger wrapped in a rainbow. Like, that's not what I'm looking for. So what kind of active allyship have you seen, leading examples from where you work?
So thanks a lot for the question. I think it's very pragmatic, real. We start the D&I Regional Council in Europe has been created back in 2014. And in 2019, just only 2019, our new CEO announced the new values at Pfizer. That the year was it was in Spain, actually. And one of the 4 values, one of these values was equity. So before the values came to life, the only way of being pragmatic and impactful on initiative was creating a network of allies. And without that kind of network, we could not make any kind of impact. You need to imagine that at the European level, we are around 25,000 colleagues in 27 different countries with 27 different needs and nature of organization. Because I can tell you, being an ally in a commercial organization is completely different than being an ally in a production site or manufacturing site. So also there, we work closely with leadership team. And I like, Paul, when you say leadership is very important, because the concept, so I don't like to go through definition, but during one of the recent training that we received, it was giving a definition of allyship. It was using our privilege for people that they don't have the same privilege. So what we did in that case, we just start connecting concretely with the leadership team and country managers. And instead of going through the D&I channel team to cascade initiative, we were asking them to using their privilege as a senior leader in the organization to deliver any kind of trainings on a specific D&I topics. And this was perceived by the colleagues in a completely different way. Not just something like optional, but something that was coming from the business and as a request to the business. So this completely changed the concept of allyship. One of my first example of allyship, personal example of allyship, was in our LGBTQ plus open, it's called it Open Advisor Employee Network campaign that we've launched at the European level. We started with 17 members at that time from the Italian chapter, and we become 2,000 members and allies within 2 years' time. And this was only possible, again, to first of all, create a toolkit, how to become an ally, how to be an ally. There are many people that sometimes they want to help, they don't know even how they can help or how they can be an active ally. And sometimes when you try to be an ally, but you don't have enough maturity, you create even more damage because people at that point, they feel also that they are kind of overjudged or overestimated. So we made a real maturity and educational process through the allyship. We became personal ally as well. So we work with business psychologists, we work with D&I professional experts to, first of all, understand which the topic we want to provide allyship, because something is for the LGBTQ plus community, something is for the Men as Ally campaign. I tell you that now after learning new way of being, the most effective way to is something that you need to learn.
So I absolutely agree on that need to learn. So I'm a member of the LGBT plus community, but every day I'm learning something new about that community, and I feel like a gay elder now at 43 because the kids are finding new things. So we're always learning. But I wonder, Antonio, to what extent is that movement that you've created, those 2,000 people signing up to be an ally, having an impact on your effectiveness at Pfizer? How is it making a difference to your bottom line, for want of a better description? Do you see it driving performance at Pfizer?
Yes. So and here again we connect again with the importance of being strategic and work with your business partners to make your strategy effective. So what we have done, we have tried to involve business leaders in the conversation and trainings that we were delivering. And we were starting to work, for example, with our HR organization, such, for example, people experience, to understand where we could intervene in any policy that was supporting specific needs of the LGBTQ plus community. We have created, after the creation of the Open Advisor Employee Network, transgender policy in several countries. Or we tried also to understand how we could support family needs also from the LGBTQ plus communities, from the rainbow families. So, and again, there is a never-ending process, because every year potentially something else is popping up. Most important, also the kind of country that you are going to intervene is different. Having this kind of conversation in Madrid or having this conversation in Poland, I can tell you that is completely different approach. Absolutely. So also there, you need to be also aware of the legal constraints you may have, of the penal constraints you may have, and be strategic also to understand how you can be also using your privilege as a company that is leading in the market, maybe also to change the conversation externally and try to have an impact on community as well, not just internally at the company.
Absolutely. We have to code switch, don't we? We have to find different ways. Misha Ann, come on in.
Yes, I keep popping in here, but I'm so
Don't you worry.
passionate about this topic and I have so much to say. So a couple of things. One of the things that at WorkHuman we research extensively is psychological safety. And this is to your question about the relationship between allyship and the bottom line. And what we find is that there is a relationship between inclusion and psychological safety. And part of the definition of psychological safety is feeling safe enough to speak up and contribute with your ideas, right? Or to say, hey, this is unsafe, or this feels wrong. And those actions and behaviors inevitably contribute to the bottom line in terms of things like innovation. If I have an idea, I feel safe enough to share it. If I see something that has a negative safety implication, I feel safe enough to speak up about that. If this idea has negative consequences that I know because I work on the front line or I'm close to the customer, I feel like I can say something. And so I need people to understand that these two things are inextricably linked. The other thing I want to say is, when I think about companies that come across as least performative to me, I think about companies like Pfizer. And here's why. There are companies that talk about their inclusion strategy as it relates to their employees. And the least performative companies to me are the ones that take a broader view and they say, okay, how can we impact our communities? How can we ensure diversity and inclusion in things like clinical trials? How can we make sure that our suppliers are diverse? And I know that Pfizer hits on all of those pillars. And to me, that convinces me that a company is not just performative, but is a true ally to different communities.
Thank you, Misha Ann. Absolutely. Sandy, if I can bring you in now to build on those points, really getting into those tangible benefits, both internal and external of allyship. And if I could stretch it a little bit further, Sandy, because I reckon you can deal. What do we do when those companies get a backlash, right? So they've kind of done it externally, and then suddenly someone's not happy, and they retreat. And obviously I'm not going to name companies here, but getting that balance right. Anything thoughts on that would be great to hear, Sandy.
Yeah, thank you. I think what everyone is saying is just stimulating so much thought for me about what we're learning, what's working and what's not. So I'm going to break this down into 3 different things. The first thing I want to say is I want to kind of call out people are need-based. So everything we do is based on fulfilling our primary needs, corporations especially, since they are for-profit enterprises generally, right? So there are ways we get things done inside a corporation, and the human network is the primary way we do that. It's the way we actualize everything we do. Before the concept of allyship, if you just went back in time and looked inside companies, everybody had somebody who had their back, who supported them, who when they were in a meeting and they said something, someone else said, yeah, I agree with Sandy. I support that. And if that was a more powerful executive, that then gave me power. So when we talk about allyship, we're talking about sharing that outside of the circle of people who used to have that privilege only, basically white men, to more communities, right? So I think, one, it's really important just to understand that anything that's going to be successful in business is going to be grounded in the needs that help the business accomplish its goals. And allyship is distributing that power outside a small circle of privilege, which is also better for the company, because the more limited the circle of power and decision-making, the more limited the company. So first and foremost, to hit benefits, I would tell you that one thing is you're unleashing superpowers of individuals and communities. So more creativity, more difference of creativity is just going to drive more success. That's just, purely facts, right? The second thing is the safety that Misha Ann was talking about. So safety allows people to feel like they can not only speak up and introduce good ideas, and you'll get more of that. So there's just literally more superpower array coming online. But it also helps with awareness, because people, like companies, have lots of issues, and we only become aware of that over time. So more people that can speak up and say, like, hey, I need to tell everyone in a meeting that the product we're so excited about is a terrible product, the faster the company will learn and change the product, right? So that awareness is very powerful. Transfer and distribution of power, big deal, very big deal, right? Everybody in the room wants someone to support them. Every one of us, when we say something, we want someone to like it and support us in it. So that's really necessary. It helps form greater teams. I think the third benefit, and there's a fourth, the third benefit is when a company stands for values, people trust it. Disney, Yahoo, Verizon, Dial. When I joined Pinwheel, one of the reasons I took the recruiting call was because when I heard they were trying to create fair financial systems for all, I believed in that. I trusted it. And I found their reputation was very strong because other people trusted that and saw that as important. Finally, when you survey employees, one thing they will say to you is their best manager had their back. And I remember many situations in my career when I was in challenging situations and my manager really had my back. There was nothing like that in terms of empowerment, trust, loyalty. Allyship, I think, is very much about that. Now, in terms of performative or not, companies, when they actually value something, they will do 6 things. Say it, do it, reward it, systematize it, hire and fire against it, and promote to it. If they do those things, because ultimately reward is the anchor, that means it really matters to them. So remember before diversity, when managers, we didn't performance manage managers based on how well they were managers, which means we didn't actually care about management back then. And then when diversity rolled in, we said diversity is great, but it wasn't anyone's performance review. It wasn't in their bonus share. So it didn't matter until it did. And then that started to change. Companies like Disney, Verizon started actually tying it to bonuses. That made a huge impact and change. So we have to make sure that if something like allyship matters and we know we'll be more successful as a business, we've explained the why, we've tied it to compensation systems, right? And like people have said before, like Paul said, Amisha and said, Antonio, we are measuring it all the time because clearly it matters. Now, when companies do the marketing, as you talked about, and maybe they're being performative, maybe they're not. I think the important thing is once they realize like, oh, we've asked for this and now are we actually backing it up? Are we making it happen? 1, people need to be able to call them on that. And then 2, they need to say like, okay, so why did this matter? What have we learned? What will we do now? And then how are we creating accountability so we know those things happen? You know, at the end of the day, when I think about back when I was at Yahoo, we really pushed for diversity when Verizon had bought us. Both companies did. We had the most diverse team that we ever achieved, and we went profitable based on that. So we saw the tangible outcomes of more different thinking, trying different things, the diversity coming between the 2 companies, and it drove greater success. And then we story told that. We showed those measurements every other week to the whole company and story told that till no one would listen to us anymore. Like we just kept telling those stories about employees and teams that because of their diversity thought of something different and changed the landscape for the company and people in the world. So you have to really own the accountability, the necessity of the action, and show that connection between like, oh, people spoke up in this meeting because they felt safe. We realized something about a product we wouldn't have realized, and look at how that translated. The bottom line is difference gives meaning in life. And I believe difference plus imagination equals innovation. And that's what we want from everybody. We want them thinking differently, solving problems, and helping us innovate. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you, Sandy. And I think it's that you're really describing that difference between a knee-jerk PR exercise and something that is integral to ways of working. And Paul, I wonder if you want to come in here. Misha, and I'm going to come to you in a moment on leadership. And I'd love to also dig down a bit into what happens when leaderships make a mistake as allies, right? Because we can find ourselves when we're doing our very best work, we get it wrong sometimes, right? And then we kind of lose our nerve a bit as an ally. So I'd love to dig into that with you, Mishran. But Paul, come on in with your thoughts about that difference between how you manage these different things, because I know a lot about co-op and how you had to navigate this in the UK. But do build.
Well, thank you. I love, Sandy, what you talked about around storytelling, because I think it's incredibly powerful. And I think, you know, if I think about some of my own experiences, where I've learned the most is hearing about what other people have experienced, the good, the bad, and everything in between. So I think it's incredibly important. I saw something on LinkedIn this morning. I am not going to claim it as mine. I don't want it to get into any kind of copyright, you know, trouble or anything like that. But I saw a statement that said, a little phrase that said, you know, if you want to inspire other people, don't show them your superpowers, show them theirs. And I think for me, that is allyship at its core. And I think that feels quite hard sometimes, because you have to kind of let go of your ego. You have to let go of wanting to be right all the time. You have to let go of wanting to get your point of view across. and you have to kind of step back and lead other people into that. And I think that's kind of one of my own learnings, I suppose. And when I talk to people across my organization and across other organizations, they're kind of like, well, how do I know I'm doing a good job? And I think as individuals, as an organization, you know you're doing a good job if it feels quite hard. Because if you're being a good ally, it doesn't come easily, because otherwise the world would be a very, very different place. So I think the more difficult conversations you're having, the more you're challenging the status quo, the more you are counterculture, probably the better job you're doing is what I would say.
Thank you, Paul. And it should be a bit uncomfortable. I'm currently having 400 conversations with members of the House of Lords on trans issues, and I'm not trans, and it's much easier for me to be having those conversations than someone who is trans. But my days, it ain't easy, right? This ain't just turning up and waving a flag. This is hard miles. So it absolutely shouldn't come easy. Misha-Ann, come in, tell us about leadership and the role that leadership plays in this, but also, if you wouldn't mind, exploring those moments when it's tricky and it goes a bit wrong as well would be great to hear your thoughts on. Do you think she deliberately went off? Did I push it too far, Sandy?
No.
No, Misha-Ann does not strike me as someone who would go, I'm leaving this situation. She'll come back.
While we're waiting for, I just want
Please
to comment to Paul's, because Paul, you just made me think of something so wonderful, which is I had a recruiter that worked for me, and she was amazing, named Meredith back at Yahoo, and she took time to find her voice. And I remember, in a meeting, I measure success by if everyone speaks. And eventually she spoke and she had a great voice. Well, recently I was at a recruiting dinner with her, and everyone was debating about something about diversity. And I started to say something, and she turned to me and she goes, Sandy, wait, can you let me say one more thing? And I said, yes. And it was such a proud moment for me that she said to me, like, let my voice continue. And it was just the right thing for her to do. And it showed me that she was asserting herself in a way that was real growth. And I was just really happy. And I'm a big talker, but I was so happy that I realized I needed to shut up and let her voice continue. So seeing that growth was just a really wonderful thing. The other thing I wanted to mention, so thank you I think those stories are ones we need to really illustrate. Ruth, to your point about trans, so I think what's at the root of diversity is that we're all born broken. We try and perfect ourselves, and we have a part of ourselves that wants to be individual and a part that wants to be collective, and they're always battling. And through life, we kind of learn the balance. I think that when we see other people who can exert their individuality and be unique and be diverse and be comfortable with it, that either makes you feel appreciative of it, or it can scare people who may feel weak and afraid to share their own vulnerability. So if you look at people being weak in the world and scared of those who can actually come out and be themselves, you would understand why there can be anger, hatred, even racism from weak people towards people who are strong when they're different and still comfortable being different. Well, who creates the most difference about themselves in the world? Trans people, because they have to create their entire identity against the norm. Absolutely. So to me, there is no greater superpower, super being, than a trans person with that level of courage. And so I'm so glad you are having those conversations, because that is the frontier of freedom of identity in terms of diversity that we really have to champion for people.
Absolutely agree 100%. Misha-Ann is back in the house. So Misha-Ann, I'm going to go on mute, and we want to hear all your thoughts. Misha-Ann, come on in.
Just making sure everybody can hear me. Okay, so sorry for that internet snafu, hotel Wi-Fi. So I'm really passionate about this topic and this question. So I'll answer it from a macro perspective and a micro perspective, and then I'll get to the question about what happens when leaders get it wrong and what should they do. So from a macro perspective, what I see sometimes from organizations that I consider performative is they just implement something, right? And I'm going to come in hot here, like, anti-racism training, which is great, by the way. I'm not against it, but it can come across as a check the box thing. Now, can you imagine if you went to the doctor and you said you felt ill and they just gave you a medicine without diagnosis? Like, you would think that was ridiculous, right? But for some reason, we don't approach diversity and inclusion the same way. And so from a macro perspective, I think what needs to happen, and I'm so passionate about this, I wrote a whole article about it, is you need to diagnose first, right? Then come up with a strategy that is intentional and targeted to what you find that is specific to your organization. You need to communicate that strategy and be transparent about what you found. And then you need to be transparent about what you found. And then you need to keep communicating your progress towards what you said you were going to do. And if these are wins, then this is the storytelling that Sandy talked about, right? So it further cements it into your culture. Now, on the micro level, I think leaders need to model behaviors for other people. So recently did some research with an organization called She Suite, looking at the experiences of women in the workplace. And one of the things we talked about was male allies who showed up for women and the things that those men were doing for women. And some of these things I've already heard in this conversation, right? So things like speaking up for that person when they're not in the room in order to distribute the power, getting people in those rooms that wouldn't otherwise be there, advocating for people for opportunities. One other thing that I think is probably not talked about enough is a couple of things I will say is number one, listening. When you're in that mentor-mentee relationship with somebody who's different from you, do not center yourself, your opinions, or your own experiences in that conversation. Listen in order to learn. And then the second thing, that I think leaders can do that I think is not talked about enough is just the simple action of letting it be known that you're looking for somebody to mentor. Because if you're waiting for the disadvantaged person to gather up the courage and be like, hey, can you be my mentor? Like, it's hard, okay? So just letting it be known that you're looking for somebody to mentor. Now, as you said, Ruth, sometimes people get this wrong, right? Like well-intentioned, intention and impact are not the same, right? You can have the best of intentions, but do something that negatively impacts people. Now I'm going to come in hot again. I think one of the worst things that we've done in terms of anti-racism is made the racist the big bad boogeyman that nobody wants to be. And so what this means is that people don't want to admit that they've done something wrong, right? Racism is the boogeyman. Racism is the bad guy. And we should all be hyper focused on rooting out those behaviors and those biases in ourselves, because at the end of the day, stereotyping is part of the human existence, and racism is stereotyping gone wrong, right? Not systemic racism, but individual behaviors that are racist. And so we should be more open to identifying that in ourselves and talking about it. So coming back to your question, what do you do when you get it wrong? You be vulnerable, you admit it, and you say it publicly so that other people can feel comfortable doing the same thing in your organization. And in that way, you become a group of people that are continually learning and progressing in this space.
And Ruth, from my side, and sorry, I know that we are very late, but I want just to spend 1 minute. Misha, I think it's very important what you say, and I think it's as well important to be aware that being a leader, when you become a leader, you don't receive any specific training how to be a great and inclusive leader. It's something that we have to say that. So as a D&I expert, I think it's absolutely important to work closely with leaders to understand, because again, we are living constant changing times. And with the change comes the pressure. With the pressure comes the uncertainty. With the uncertainty comes microaggression, micromanagement, and all the rest that it doesn't make an inclusive environment. And is impacting all the D&I space and activities. So I think we should be very close, specifically in the moment of crisis, specifically in the moment where leaders are acting as jerk externally or perceived as jerk or not inclusive, and try to work with them to explain which kind of biases are triggering that moment. Because most of the time I can tell you that we don't even know which are the biases that we are applied to. So again, as a D&I expert, I know that we need to do a lot of meditation sometimes, and sometimes it's very frustrating. I can tell you from my own personal experience, But the more we grow on D&I, the more we understand that we don't need to give for granted that everyone is at our level of maturity. So we need always to step down, wait for the others to arrive at the same stage, and proceed together with them.
Thank you, Antonio, and thank you, Misha Ann. I was so engaged in what you're both saying, I momentarily forgot I was chairing. So so getting back in the zone of holding this thing, because there is something very, it requires reflection, right? It requires a capacity to reflect. And part of what I encounter in my work at Deeds and Words is people get so defensive when they're called out. They instantly, white people really want to prove they're not racist all the time. And it's like, guys, it's okay. Shh. Stop, reflect. It's possible that you may have made a mistake here, and it's okay, but we can build this together. But forgiveness becomes part of that. Paul, I just wondered if you had any kind of final thoughts, because question panels online are always a little bit rigid, and anything you wanted to say that you haven't been able to say, we'd love to hear it.
I don't think so. I think just on the conversation around leadership that we've just had, I think, you know, it just goes to highlight that, you know, across our organizations, it's really important that we provide space for people to have the conversation. But also, Antonio, your point, you know, you don't automatically arrive in a leadership role and know absolutely everything. You know, at our core, we're all human, so we'd like to think we have a, you know, a basic level of understanding of how to treat other people, but that's not always the case. And I think creating that space for leaders is equally important, because, you know, within any organization, it's a big job, it's a huge responsibility. And going back to what we talked about earlier around, you know, are people wanting or expecting us to have a perspective or a point of view on what's happening in the world and do something about it? Our leaders are the ones that, you know, that drive that. So I would just kind of wrap up with that, really.
Thank you, Paul. Sandy, any final thoughts?
Yes. I remember in 2022 doing a training with a bunch of leaders at Yahoo, and they were saying how going into COVID and after the tragic murder of George Floyd, they were very determined to be great leaders, great allies, be supportive. They did all the trainings. We made them do a road to allyship training where it was 3 steps to actually understand how to be a good ally, which I think was a really great move by the diversity team that we worked with. But they said to me, we feel like we thought we were going to be so good at this, and now we realize we weren't. And I said, now you're finally getting good at it, because you realize that you're not going to be, you're going to be learning all the time. And so that's one important thing. Learning is a way to be good at this. Diversity will always be about learning. Inclusion will always be, allyship especially. So I remember we were doing a summit on allyship, and I went online and did research on the internet because I really didn't have a great definition. I didn't understand a lot about the history of it. And we got online, I started asking questions of the community and the company. And I said, oh, this is what I researched. And someone said, I just appreciate, Sandy, that you did research instead of just showing up and asking us to tell you what a good ally would be. So my tips are, 1, do your research. Don't make the people you're trying to support do all the work. 2, then you've got to learn. 3, you've got to ask, what do the people you're trying to be an ally to need? Because it will be different from every different set of people and every individual. And then you've got to learn where you're good at it, where you're not. And Misha, and I love what you said about racism. We had situations where we actually had employees admit things they felt and thought that were racist, and we all shared things we'd done that were biased. And I said, look, no, it's the human condition. People aren't immune to this, and you won't be getting rid of, like you said, racism or bias from your brain. The brain literally works on a bias filter. So it is, again, all continually about the learning. So research, ask, take action, and learn, right? And like we've all said, measure it, and then storytell. Because again, the more people see great allies, and if we reward them in our corporate systems, we reward great leaders who are being great allies, I guarantee you more people will do it.
Thank you very much, Sandy. And thank you to all our panel. I think we could have easily done 2 hours on this subject, because allyship is really the root of all effective inclusion, diversity and equality policies, which are at the heart of organizational effectiveness. And really it all comes back to this. I think I've been really struck by the need to get out of the way, but also get in, and that's quite a hard balance, right? Do the research, ask the questions, do the listening, and then step away. Doesn't lend itself to the heroic leadership model we've all been brought up with, where you have to rescue people and be in charge and sort it all out. So I hope we can all keep learning. Thank you all for an amazing panel. The next panel up is prioritizing the S in ESG, with some amazing panelists after this break. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you.